There's a lot of doom and gloom in the headlines and statistics about the Black birthing experience.
African-American mothers dying at a higher rate than any other racial or ethnic group.
There are urgent challenges facing Black women before, during, and after pregnancy.
But why so many African-American infants die is a bit of a mystery.
But what about the joy? My name is Kimberly Seals-Allers, and I'm a journalist, author of 5 books for women, a former senior editor at Essence, a maternal and infant health strategist, and founder of Earth, a rating app for doctors and hospitals made by and for Black women and birthing people of color. Welcome to Birthright, a podcast about joy and healing in Black birth. By seeking out and exploring positive birth stories, we can find ideas, solutions, and blind spots in our quest to make the birth experience equitable for all Black birthing bodies.
They'll go back and say, did you see the were you in there when that Black girl was dancing during labor? Did you see her get on all fours in an OR? You know, that's the stuff that I want them to go back and tell their children's children.
They were the talk of the floor. I don't know if they realized this or not, but they were. Just from the moment that they walked in, they were holding hands. You could tell they were in love. This was going to be a great time. Like, this should be everybody's birth story.
On the other end, providers, this is how you deliver culturally competent care. You connect with people. Institutions, you hire people that look like the patients in your area.
Check out birthrightpodcast.com for show notes or to be a guest. And don't forget to follow me at IMK Seals-Allers on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook to get all the show extras and to join me in this necessary and overdue conversation of reclaiming our birthright. Hello, and welcome to Birthright, a podcast about joy and healing in Black birth. My name is Kimberly Seals-Allers. I'm the host of Birthright, the founder of the Earth app, and today we are live in our virtual world for a special episode and our season finale of season 1 of Birthright Podcast. This season, we shared 8 amazing, positive, inspiring, and informative stories. And this is our second restoration episode. That's a special episode where we host storytelling and healing, where we speak with 2 birthing people who have had a traumatic birth experience, let them sit down with a therapist or healer, and begin their healing journey. You know, one thing is clear: we cannot continue to normalize the trauma and pain that resides in our Black birthing space. All of it has historical context, and for many of us, it's multi-generational. But we must heal. We must heal, and we must honor ourselves as worthy of healing, and that this should not be our legacy. This should not be our norm. And so today I am honored to host a demonstration of what healing can look like for Black women and birthing people. And thank you all for being here. Today, we have 2 brave mamas and a committed therapist who are here to help us do the work and help us and show us how it can be done. I first want to thank the California Healthcare Foundation, which is the funder for the Birthright podcast. And I want to thank you all for joining us for this informative and necessary conversation about how we can heal Black birth trauma. First with us, I want to introduce Nika Semister. Nika has been our in-house therapist for season 1 of Birthright. She's a licensed social worker who has 2 decades of experience helping individuals and families build and strengthen their relationships with themselves and others. Her work includes supporting diverse populations, including LGBTQIA community and self-harming young adults. But she also specializes in women and couples who suffer with perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, miscarriage, and loss. She's the founder of My Local Therapist, LLC, where she provides mental health services in New York. And you can follow her at Nika_Semister, SYMISTER, on Instagram. And then I'm excited to introduce you to our first mama, our first birthing person with us today, Amisa Brewer-Hoffman, who is a combined medical and public health master's student at Columbia University. She enjoys Pilates, warm weather, and a good picnic. That's important to know. And academically, she has an interest in radiology and wants to improve health outcomes for minoritized infants and birthing folks. And she's going to be starting her radiology residency this fall. She lives in Washington Heights with her husband and her 3-month-old son. We're so excited to have Amisa here. We thank her for sharing her story to be of service to our community. And we thank NACA for her continued work. And then we'll bring out our other mama, but we'll start with Amisa. Thank you both for joining me.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor to work with you and Birthright. So thank you.
Thank you. Amisa, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling all right. I'm really excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
Okay, good. Well, I wanted to start by offering an opportunity to share with our audience your story. What happened to you during the birth of your son, who's now almost 3 months old, and to tell us how you're doing. So the floor is yours. Tell us your story.
Yeah, so I guess before starting to tell my story, I just want to start off by saying that both me and my baby are healthy now. So he's 3 months old, like you mentioned. But I feel like my birth experience has left lasting marks on me, my self-esteem, and definitely through beginning my journey through motherhood. So I guess I always had high hopes for my childbirth experience. I'm a medical student and I did public health research in perinatal epidemiology. So because of that, I've helped deliver babies before, but I also was aware of the risks that Black women face in giving birth. And so I thought I felt truly prepared to advocate for myself and prepared for like what all that might happen to me. But instead, I guess I kind of experienced what I consider to be the most disrespectful and dismissive interaction I've ever had with healthcare. So during labor, my baby's heart rate started dropping, so I was rushed for an emergency C-section. And my husband, who also had prepared to advocate for me, decided to speak up because I was so in shock. He said something like, "Hold on, can we talk about this for a minute?" to the doctor. And the doctor replied rudely, something like, "Well, your baby's heart rate is dropping, so we only have about 5 seconds to just go." I also remember being wheeled in to the OR. I was really being wheeled through the hallway, just crying and super exposed. They didn't even try to cover me, I feel like. And I remember seeing patients and other random people in the hospital just watching me. And the whole time, instead of explaining to me what was happening every step of the way, the staff would stop themselves from explaining and say, "Oh, well, you're in medicine. You know already." And I think it goes without saying that being a patient is always a different experience, no matter what your knowledge or academic history or anything like that is. Being a patient is definitely a vulnerable position to be in. So I feel like I was kind of dismissed and kind of just seen as a body. And I definitely would have found comfort in them explaining things to me just like they did to everyone else, but I was not afforded that luxury. And I should add, a resident even assumed that I would participate in a research study because I was also in medicine. So she didn't ask me to participate, she just enrolled me. The most devastating part, I should mention, was hearing my baby cry once he was born. I was so happy and expected them to put him in my arms. He was behind the drape because I was in the operating room getting the C-section. But instead, they whisked him off to the NICU without telling me or my husband. And no one mentioned this to us for like several minutes while we were waiting for them to hand him over to us. And I didn't actually have a chance to see him for 6 hours. Because he was in an incubator in the NICU, I wasn't even able to hold him for 3 days. I was able to, of course, look at him through the glass walls. And because of that, I wasn't able to initiate breastfeeding. And he was given formula without consent in the NICU, which was really, really upsetting to me. And no one came to me to help teach me how to pump or to hand express milk in order to feed him. Instead, he was just given formula. And during those 6 hours, I really just remember the 6 hours where I hadn't seen him at all. I just remember crying and crying and crying. I felt like my baby was a stranger to me. I didn't know what had happened. I felt like I must still be pregnant because nothing has really changed. And even now, I still cry thinking about how he had been alone for those 6 hours and just untouched for so long. And also during that time, I wrote him a letter about what we'd both been through. So for my birth experience, I had really pictured it being a collaborative experience between me and my baby, working to get him through the birth canal, and then it would end with us being able to hold each other. But I feel like my birth happened to me instead of me being an active participant in it. And I feel like I didn't really have any agency over anything. It was completely different from how I originally planned. And I guess I even asked my husband to rip up the printed out copies we brought of the birth plan because the thought of finding it later while unpacking my hospital bag was devastating. My plans had all gone out the window. Plans for skin to skin, plans for breastfeeding, everything that I prepared for up until that point had felt totally pointless, and I felt stupid thinking back to the months and months and months of preparation I'd done for a vaginal delivery. The exercises, the breathing, the aftercare products I had waiting at home, they all went to waste essentially. And in all of this, I guess I felt mostly disappointment in myself and shame. I avoided telling family and friends that I had a C-section, mostly at first because I didn't want people to worry and I didn't want to cause a whole fuss. I just wanted to make sure that me and my baby were stable before making any announcements to people. But I also realized later that I've been ashamed to tell people because I feel like my body failed to labor and I didn't want it to be true, and telling people about it would make it true. And so right now, something else I wanted to mention is that my 3-month-old, he has colic. So that just means he cries a lot more than the average baby, and he cries for several hours a day. And even though I know this isn't the case based off my medical understanding of colic, I sometimes worry that it's because of his traumatic birth and his time in the NICU, and I blame myself at times. And what hurts me the most right now is this guilt and the worry that something I did or either the care that I received might have caused harm to my son. And I really worry about that every day.
Wow, Amisa, thank you so much for sharing. I'm so sorry that you had that experience. Um, you know, for someone who's in the medical field, they made a lot of assumptions and you probably received less information and were treated even more poorly because of assumptions versus them giving you more information. Thank you so much for sharing. I'll let Neka, fully respond to what you said today, but thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you.
Neka, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that.
There we go.
I said, thank you so much for sharing as well. I said it's interesting. There's so many layers. There is one piece about having a birth plan and it not going the way you want, but I think that's very very separate from your providers not being respectful and talking to you through the process and it being collaborative. And I think that has nothing to do with your body at all. And so it's a bit disheartening to hear you've taken on that responsibility and that guilt of something that you really had nothing to do with, right? I think you framed it very well in saying, the birth happened to you and it wasn't something that you really was a part of. And I can also understand the correlation or the wonder, at least, if the colic or the discomfort that he's having has anything to do with his first experience. And it definitely has a lot to do with your first experience, right? Not being able to hold him, not being able to have skin to skin. 3 days is a really long time. 6 hours is an extremely long time after birth without any information. And so I'm curious to know, although I'm extremely grateful that both of you are healthy and well, I'm curious to know how you've been able to process or manage the trauma that you've experienced, right? I mean, it's interesting. I hear a lot of women talk about not sharing having C-sections because of this whole idea of quote unquote natural birth, right? And what that means. And, especially when you're well read and you think you've done all the information, you've done all the things to get all the information. One is an example that you cannot read everything, right? There's like every birth is so different. You can read all the books and still never know what can happen because you're not the only person in charge, right? And so I am not shocked, but extremely disappointed with the way you were treated. And so what Kimberly said with them not giving you information, not only because they just made a lot of assumptions, but I think the blind idea that we're doctors and you shouldn't question us, and we should automatically understand that we're making the right decision, so we don't have to tell you, is really prevalent there, which is problematic. So I'm happy that you wrote him a letter. That is something I would definitely have suggested, writing a letter to your son. But what else have you done Um, since if anything, that has been helpful or not helpful.
And Nika, can we ask you just to speak up a little bit because you're coming in very low for everyone. So just when you respond, I'm sorry, Amisa, I want to give you a chance to respond.
Can you hear me better?
Yes, that's better.
Okay.
Thank you. And Misa, you're muted.
So to deal with what I would consider to be a traumatic experience in the way that I felt at the
Amisa, we can't hear you all of a sudden.
hold on.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. So let me just turn off my Bluetooth. Okay. So the first person that I told was my sister, and this was probably 4 or 5 days after I'd given birth. And I remember I wasn't able to get through the whole story without crying. And I guess I told that story 15, 20 times since then. And each time it's gotten a little bit better. And I think just kind of putting it out there, allowing other people to hear it, whether or not they respond in an appropriate way or respond at all, is just helpful. I found that to be helpful, sharing it, letting people know that it happened. It makes it less of a scary thing and something that is dark and so that I want to hide. It kind of makes it more acceptable, or not acceptable that happened to me, but it makes it my feeling negative about it acceptable. I feel like my feelings are validated when I tell other people about it.
Do you feel there's some normalcy around it? And what I mean by that is, have you heard, can you hear me? Has there been any responses like this has happened to me as well? I usually hear when people tell their stories, they're not usually the only ones that have experienced something. Maybe not the exact same thing, but some kind of variation of, their birthing plan not happening the way they expected.
Yeah, I definitely have felt that way. I'm in a virtual moms group, and we had the first session. We told our birth stories, and of course, it got very emotional. And the running theme throughout all of them was that we all had something we were a little bit disappointed about or felt like could have gone differently, and that definitely made me feel better to hear that other people had similar experiences to me. Because up until that point, I felt alone, and even isolating myself by not telling other people what happened definitely wasn't helping.
Did you remember everything, or did it come back to you in pieces?
It definitely came back to me in pieces. I don't know if that's just because of the medications I was on, for undergoing a surgery, or because it was just I was crying a lot, right? So I wasn't actually fully present when doctors were coming in, nurses were coming in, people were talking to me. Mostly my husband was talking to them and trying to help me communicate with them because I was very shut off from what was happening. So it's hard to say what I'm remembering is coming back slowly, or if it's kind of it always had been there. But he also has recounted stuff to me.
Right. The reason I ask that is for that reason, right? It happens so fast. Things move so fast. There's medication, and something like you said, crying. You're not that present, and so you have your own idea of what occurred. You have people telling you what happened, and sometimes there are moments when you're with your child and memories come up. And so sometimes that's re-traumatizing in itself every time you have a flashback of a new memory. And that also allows people to feel guilty because sometimes they feel like, well, I wasn't even present. How could I have made these decisions? Which again is not your fault, right?
No.
But that's how you reflect back, right? When every new memory comes up, it's another reminder that you were not in control. So there was, that's why I asked that question.
Yeah, definitely. And I do remember some things from reading the letter that I wrote to my son during those 6 hours, but it wasn't really a linear story about what had happened. It was mostly just about my feelings about it at that time. And of course, reading that brings up a lot of emotions, and looking at photos of him when he was in the NICU brings up a lot of emotions as well.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I think one of the things that we've explored here are around expectations, particularly with Black women who have a unique relationship to perfection and getting things right. Like we tend to hold that a little bit differently, right? And we want everything to be just right. And then what happens when that doesn't happen, not through fault, through issues that we can understand, but feeling like something was taken from you, like you were robbed of something, right?
Yeah.
This podcast is named Birthright for a reason in terms of the things that we are owed and we have not received, particularly as relates to birth. And I think this feeling that something was taken from you is something that that so many people carry and struggle with and need help processing. That is a form of trauma. Not that we don't understand that not everything is going to be ideal, but how it happens when it happens with disrespect, right? So if someone had explained everything to you, if there weren't assumptions made, if your husband was, responded to, so many things that could have made this experience so different and not necessarily at the same level of trauma, which happens with the disrespectful treatment, this not knowing, and this disregard. So it is really critically important that we honor that. I thank you so much for sharing your story, Amisa. And I want to remind people, I'm seeing so many comments in the chat where people are saying, I've had a similar experience. This is why we created the Earth app, right? For you to leave your reviews so they can be of value to the community. And then on the back end, we use those reviews to really push for change, right? Amisa and I both live in New York City, and you delivered at Mount Sinai West, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we have to share our experiences and let people know so that our stories have value in letting people know that they're not alone, but also in warning and informing others of the care that we receive. So I just want to remind people, particularly those in the chat leaving comments, one, I'm honored that by Amisa sharing her story, it has made you all, many realize that they're not alone. That's 98.7% of it. I'll let Nika give her professional opinion on that, but that is critically important as we try to heal the Black birth space. I want to bring in our next mom, and then we'll come back to Amisa and make sure that we have time to listen to both of these experiences. Our next mother, Janae, is a mom of two, including an angel baby who died 2 hours after she was born at around 21 weeks. Janae herself was born and raised in Providence, Rhode Island, and graduated from Rhode Island College with a bachelor's degree in psychology and a minor in criminal justice. And so we're honored to have Janae join us today to share a little bit more about her experience and how we can help her continue on her healing journey. Janae, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Great, so much. So I want to just give you the floor. I just want to first commend your bravery for coming on to talk about this issue. I know it's very personal and still very sensitive for you. So I want to thank you for that. But I wanted just to turn it over to you to share with us about what happened to you, to your beautiful daughter, and tell us your story.
Okay, so just to start, when my husband and I decided that we wanted to start a family due to some medical conditions that I had or didn't officially know, I didn't have regular cycles. I knew that we probably needed to go and talk to a doctor to see what that would look like for us when we did decide we wanted to have children. And early on, we went to a fertility clinic and we were informed that I had PCOS, which is polycystic ovaries. And due to that and some other complications, that we were only candidates for in vitro fertilization. And I think at first that was kind of difficult for me to take in, but again, I've heard stories of women trying to have children and the struggle that happens and the fertility treatments and everything. So to know that like IVF was our end all be all, it kind of took off a little bit of stress, but in itself too, it's kind of saddening to know that like I couldn't do it naturally. But when we went to the fertility clinic, the first doctor that I had was very difficult to work with. I would say her bedside manner was horrible. the first thing she focused on was the fact that, according to her, I was obese and I was overweight. And statistics show that women who are obese miscarry at a higher rate than women who are in better health. And I personally didn't know anything like that. I wouldn't consider myself an obese person, but according to the BMI index, I was. So right off the bat, she was adamant about me needing to drop like 20 to 25 pounds before she would even start the process of administering me the hormones so that I could begin IVF. And that was disheartening for me because I feel like overall in life, I've been pretty healthy. I'm very active. I'm an athlete, and I'd never really been challenged about my weight in a sense. I see my PCP regularly, and it was never something that was brought up as a concern. But because I knew we wanted children, I just did what I needed to do. And I lost the 20 pounds in about 3.5 months, probably. Once I lost the weight, she was like, okay, you can start. And we began the process. What I later found out was that having PCOS, it's hard for you to gain or lose weight. And her being the fertility doctor and knowing that up front, I feel like there could have been more support behind what I needed to do to lose that weight with my condition in mind. And it was never brought up. It was just like, you need to do it. You're not trying hard enough. Like, we're not starting until you do it. So right out the gate, it started rough. But I got pregnant on my first cycle and we were extremely happy. We did all the tests and everything that was needed to be done because I am now considered a high-risk pregnancy because I had a blood clot over 10 years ago. And with doing IVF and just being pregnant alone, you're at higher risk for having blood clots. So I had to have extra tests done. I was put on a blood thinner, just all safety precautions at this point because this was my first pregnancy, just to make sure that myself and the baby stayed healthy and like we made it to full term. Around 20 weeks, I had some difficulty breathing, chest pains. I ended up going to the emergency room and they thought maybe I had a pulmonary embolism, which is a blood clot in my lungs. So due to me being a certain point in my pregnancy, they thought it was okay for me to have a chest scan. We did that. They looked, they said they didn't see anything, but it's possible for me to have small blood clots. But because I was on the blood thinner, they said, we're not really concerned because you're on the blood thinner. It'll treat those little ones and like everything should be fine. So about 2 weeks after that incident, I ended up having really bad cramps in my stomach, my lower abdomen. And I was really concerned because they didn't feel like normal growing cramp pains or the things that they tell you when you're growing, that's normal. It didn't feel that way. It was very persistent. And I immediately became concerned and I called my doctor, and the nurse that I spoke to really was like, oh, you're fine. It's just growing pains. Like, I don't think it's that serious. You don't sound like you're in a lot of pain because of the way I was talking. She didn't feel like my voice was expressing a large amount of pain. And it got to a point where I had to really say to her, like, I want the doctor to call me back because it was after hours. And she said, okay. But at the time, I honestly didn't think she was going to have him call me back because her whole attitude was so much like brushing me off. But my doctor called me back and he probably called me back in about 10 to 15 minutes. And at that point, I was very scared. So I was crying. I was expressing a lot of concern. And he too said he didn't think that it was anything serious, but he wanted me to go to the emergency room so I could be checked, and that would cause peace of mind for me. At the time, my car was in the shop. My husband was at work. My mother was at work. I didn't have anybody to bring me, and I wasn't told to go via ambulance, so I didn't think it was that big of a turnaround for me to get there. So I had my friend's boyfriend bring me to the hospital because that was the only person who was available. And when I got there, the first thing the receptionist asked me was, well, are you having contractions? And I'm like, I've never been pregnant before. I couldn't even begin to tell you what a contraction feels like. And she kind of gave me this look like, like I was wrong for saying what I was saying, but I'm scared. I'm being honest. I'm in tears, and I kind of felt like I was just pushed along and not really was presented as being of a concern. It was kind of just like, oh, okay, well, go sit there. Um, and I also remember I wasn't wearing my wedding band at the time because my fingers had swollen up. So I came in and presented as a single Black mother. And when I got into the triage room, there was a lot of doctors coming in and out. They put the heart monitor on my stomach, and I could hear the baby's heartbeat. She was moving around. Her heart rate was healthy. It wasn't in distress. So there was no concerns for her. So at that point, I kind of felt reassured, but no one was telling me anything. I had multiple nurses, resident doctors, the covering doctor come in, and everybody was checking me. I had like 3 vaginal exams at that point. They were checking my cervix, but no one was actually telling me that this is what they were doing. And so it got to a point where I had to ask, and I was like, so can someone tell me what's going on? And a nurse came in and she was like, I think we should wait until your doctor gets here. No one told me my doctor was even called and that he was on his way. So that alarmed me. And then another nurse came in and she said to me, you have a partner or someone who's supporting you through this pregnancy that can come with you. And I was like, yes, I have a husband and he's not here right now, but do I need to call him so that he can come because he's at work? And she's like, yeah, I think you should have somebody support you right now. But no one wanted to tell me why I needed support. So at the time, until my husband could get out of work, my grandmother and my sister came and they sat with me, but they really still weren't saying anything. And it wasn't until my doctor came, which thankfully was the same time my husband arrived, and they told me like, well, you're at this point, I think I was 3 or 4 centimeters dilated and I was a little shy of 22 weeks, and that was concerning. I don't know all of medical stuff about pregnancy, but I knew that was something to be concerned about, but no one was saying at that point, like, your baby is at risk of being delivered and not surviving. It was just like, well, this is what's going on. We're going to see if we can give you some pain medication to relax yourself. And if all works well, we'll put a stitch in your cervix and you can go home and like everything will be fine. That wasn't the case though. The pain medication didn't help. I probably lasted about 2 to 3 hours after they administered it before I went from being 3 to 4 centimeters dilated to about 8 or 9 centimeters dilated. And at that point, they told me like, we're going to have to deliver your baby. So of course now I'm in tears. I'm distraught because I know it's too early for my daughter to be born. The doctor made it very clear to me that according to Rhode Island law, you cannot administer the steroid to help develop their lungs until they're 23 weeks. And I was just 22 weeks at that point. So I was really scared and I felt like I don't want to lose my baby. I want to do whatever I possibly can to keep her in. And that's exactly what I did. They broke my water, a ton of blood and blood clots came out. So it was determined that there was some type of blood clotting issue that was causing me to go into premature labor. But when that happened, my cervix went down to maybe like 1 or 2 centimeters. So in my mind, I thought, okay, maybe we can still save this baby. Maybe she can stay and like they can do whatever they need to do and we'll still make it a couple more weeks for when it is safe. And I don't remember everything in the process that was going on, but like I got prepped for a blood transfusion because I had lost so much blood when they broke my water and I was still continuing to lose blood. And they were giving me medicine to induce my contractions so that I could open back up and I could push her out. And there was a lot of going on. There was a lot of movement. And I was sitting there holding, or what I felt like was holding her in. And my husband came over to me and, well, he was standing next to me the whole time, but he leaned over into my ear and he said, I need you to let her go so that you can stay. And I think just hearing the despair in his voice and the emotion, I let her go. And I delivered her. I don't remember any of it. apparently she was placed in my arms, and then she was placed with my husband, and she survived for about 2 hours before they said she passed, because she had a heartbeat the whole time, but she wasn't fully breathing because her lungs weren't developed. For me, what hurts the most out of all of it was that I didn't get to experience that last 2 hours with her. It's all from stuff that people are telling me happened, and how she was and what she looked like in the warmth of her, not in what she looked like when she had already passed and I saw her then. So I think that was my biggest loss out of the whole experience.
Janae, what was your daughter's name?
Zola.
Zola. We're going to say her name right now because we know that Zola mattered to you, and she's a Black baby who mattered to us. And I want to thank you so much for being brave enough to share your story, and want you to know that we have not forgotten Zola, and that we honor your experience and what you went through, and the baby that you lost. This is another area of normalizing that I refuse to accept, right? Which is that our babies die and nobody says anything. No, people act as if this should be something we expect or should be able to deal with. We see this happening in our communities all the time. Violence happens. Nobody shows up to support. It's something that we're supposed to be used to, right? And so I just want to know that I'm holding space for you and your pain, and that Zola was really important to you and your family, and she was important to our community, and she is missed, right? Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janae. I feel the exact same way. There's so many things. This is such a layered, and I know there's so much more to the story that you were unable to share due to time. But just from the very beginning, your story kind of highlights all the things that we know about how Black women are treated in the medical field, right? Just from the onset of the projection of your weight being problematic, although you've been in doctors and it wasn't, and bringing shame on you around that, to being dismissive about your pain when you say I'm in a lot of pain, and they don't believe that, assuming that you're alone and you're a single person. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that wasn't the case. It was just an assumption. And then I cannot, just listening to the story, the anxiety I felt on you saying, and no one said anything, and no one said anything, and no one said anything. And so I can't even imagine what that's like sitting there, right? With doctors coming in and out and not saying anything to you, and so your story is like, there's so many levels of loss, not just, the hugest loss of Zola, but, the loss of autonomy and respect and just value as a person, right? Just as a person. And so I thank you for sharing that. I wish I can just say, here's this one thing you can do, and I promise it can be all better, but there isn't, because there's so much to tackle. I am interested to know, how have you been able to cope since then?
So I did a lot of sharing with family and friends, which was really helpful because, like I said, I don't remember her physically in that sense when she was first born. So it was good to be able to talk about her, and for anyone to honestly just sit there and listen to me, especially people who were a part of my pregnancy and helped me and did different things. So to be able to share that, and that was very helpful. I had a therapist prior to getting pregnant, and so I did meet with her after, and I did a loss group, but I couldn't really connect with the mothers there because it was through the hospital that I went through. And so no one had the experience that I had at the hospital, but we all had the loss part. And I think it was hard for me because they were so comforted comforted in the moment of what they were going through, where I feel like my husband and I and my mother, because she was present as well, we didn't get that same support. And I was also the only Black and brown face that was present in a lot of those groups. So it was really hard for me to connect with them on multiple levels. When I got pregnant with my son, I did prenatal therapy as well. And that was really helpful because a lot of the concerns and scares and worries that I had were primarily because I was afraid the same thing was going to happen again. Because even now, there isn't an actual medical diagnosis for why my placenta ruptured and I went into preterm labor. There are ideas, but there isn't an actual thing that is being identified.
Which is hard to process, right? Because if there isn't this very clear reason, your mind just kind of wanders of all the things you could have done differently. That's when we go into blaming ourselves, right? What could I have done differently? What could I have eaten or anything? We think about all types of things when there aren't any clear answers. And a lot of times there aren't any clear answers or none that they give us. It's something that you said about being the only person in that support group, you know. And I know we want to bring Amisa back in, but you know, it just speaks to how loss is different for everyone, right? Because I can imagine for those women, and I don't know them, but I can imagine that they weren't dismissed at the counter and they were believed that they were in pain, and those things are very specific to us, which I can imagine they didn't. I can imagine they were shocked.
Yes.
By your experience, which also is isolating, right? And when you're supposed to be in a place that you should be supportive and everyone is looking at you like, why did that happen to you? And that didn't happen to any of us, which is why we need spaces like this, because our experiences are very different from our counterparts.
So true. I want to bring Amisa back and, you know, also just honor, first of all, this is why groups like the Shades of Blue Project, Sisters in Loss are so important. Want to give them a proper shout out for the work that they're doing to create spaces for us to have these conversations about loss and to heal with people who look like us. It's critically important that we kind of have these spaces. Janae, I know that also in your experience, you know, one of your providers was apparently one of the best in the city or state by many, many rankings and things like that. Can you tell us a little bit briefly just around that expectation and how that paired with your actual experience when you did your due diligence, thought you had one of the best doctors?
Yeah, so actually, my fertility doctor as well, the first one I had, she was ranked highly too. But with her, you could go and see her comments that patients have left, and they've all been bad. Like a lot of people have had really bad experiences with her. And of course, I found that out after the fact, and I switched my doctor because of that reason. But with my OBGYN that I had, it was very discouraging because he's ranked #1 in the state of Rhode Island for obstetricians. He even delivers a lot of the babies that are born in a year in Rhode Island. He's also one of Women and Infants' biggest on-call doctors that's always available. So even if you're not his patient, if your doctor is not available and he's on call, he could be the doctor that delivers your baby. So I felt secure and I thought I felt safe with the doctor I had, but his presence and his attitude in the deliver and labor room was not the person that I had worked with up until that point. And even the nurse that I had in the hospital room with me, she was saying that she was really disappointed in him and how he behaved and how he was just very like, at the end of it, well, this is done, and he left. And like they cleaned up. He didn't talk to me after. It wasn't the experience I was expecting for someone who is so highly ranked. And Rhode Island's small, so it was just really difficult to accept that.
Right. And I think this basic idea of human decency, someone loses a baby, and I think there is a protocol that's just human decency that many times we are not afforded. And that is, you know, ridiculously unacceptable. Nika, I wanted just to, you know, speak to Amisa's and Janae's kind of theme around disrespect, right? Like, to feel like they were in an experience and did not even get common courtesy, basic human decency, certainly in Janae's situation, and how you can heal from that level of harm when you're in an experience that is so pivotal. Like, everybody wants to recall it with some sort of joy, but anytime you want to think about it, and you can't hide the reminder, you have to smile at that baby every day, right? And so
Right. Well,
what is the process for finding that joy?
I mean, I think there's two separate things, right? I think for like Amisa, she has a healthy baby, and that joy is there. And I know Janae has a rainbow baby, and that joy is there. And so I want to kind of separate that from the individual, right? That's always going to be there. And to be quite frank, I don't want to give any false expectation that this is not going to be hurtful 30 years from now, right? It is, right? It's a traumatic experience. Anytime you talk about it, you're going to feel that tinge, right? You're going to be tearful because a lot of it had nothing to do with you, right? And I think that's the most important part, is recognizing for both of you. What I think is really difficult is that both of you were really intentional about being advocates for yourselves and doing the research and being well-read. And so I can understand feeling like I've done everything, or I'm hoping that both of you can walk away and recognize that you did everything that you could possibly do, right? No one can know everything and do everything. And trying to separate what really belongs to you and what really belongs to them, right? Because what I heard from Amisa, a lot of the shame and the guilt, I don't think belong to you, right? Even though you can't recognize that in the moment, right? There's one thing that we have a plan, and our bodies do whatever they do, right? And there's a part of that we really don't control. That is extremely and very separate from your providers not talking to you, not explaining anything to you, being dismissive to you, being disrespectful to you. And that can be anger towards them. That should not be internalized into what did I do wrong, right? Because again, these people go to work, they get their degrees, they're people too. They may have been amazing to someone else at one day, and they didn't show up for you. You're not psychic. You can't foresee that. So I think the first thing I would always recommend is separating what belongs to you from what belongs to them, and not taking it all into like, this is my fault, I should have done this, because that is usually the go-to, right? I'm in control. This is my body. I should have known, right? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I ask this? Especially when you find out things after the fact. We tend to say we should have known. It's so easy in hindsight to say that. And I think that's the biggest thing I want people to think about, like really being honest with yourselves and having some, what we call reality testing questions. Like, could I have really known that? No. Could you have known that there were blood clots? No. Right? Could you have known that there would need to be a C-section? No. These are not things you could have known, or they wouldn't talk to you. You can't foresee those things, and really trying to separate the two, if that makes any sense.
How do you feel about what Nika is saying, Amisa and Janae?
I appreciate what you're saying. I think it's definitely the truth in that it wasn't my fault, it wasn't Janae's fault, what happened, and it's really easy to blame yourself or to kind of feel like you, as it is your body, you should have done something or should have known something. And it's just like, that is the default. You're correct about that. It's just really difficult, easier said than done, to kind of acknowledge what actually happened.
Yeah. So, what I would suggest, I know both of you did some therapy. I don't know if you did therapy specifically to your birthing experience, which is very separate, which I will always recommend, right? Because it is so layered, and it is not something that you can forget about. A question I wanted to ask really quickly before I give any more recommendations: how did you guys feel about going back to your follow-up appointments? Because that's really when you're triggered, right? When you have to go back to the place or to the providers or to the hospital that failed you.
For me, it was really difficult because it was kind of like, okay, so this didn't work out. We're going to do tests and figure out what exactly went wrong. with my obstetrician. With my fertility doctor, she called me and was just like, I'm sorry you lost your baby. And I refused to meet with her if I was going to go back to that facility. And I let them know why I was not working with her again.
And for me, I guess it was only 2 weeks later because I had a C-section and you meet earlier. So that was really soon. And I didn't actually see my true OB the whole time I was in the hospital. I was there for almost a week, but I saw every other OB in the practice besides the one that was my own that I had been working with for 9 months. So seeing her for the first time and her kind of not acknowledging that and saying, "Oh, it gets better," was very, very off-putting, I'll say. I was a little bit put off by that, and it was just very triggering, which is the correct word that you used for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I expect that. So to go back to your comment of it's easier said than done. Yes, you're absolutely right. It is much easier said than done. What I will say is a lot of times, and not by choice, we have to keep going. You have to take care of your body. You have to take care of the baby. Work happens, family's there, life is still happening, even though, for you, a lot of things have changed. But really, this sounds weird, but like scheduling space to grieve, right? Literally setting time aside. I know that Amisa, you wrote to your son, but setting time aside to write down the different parts of the loss, right? Because it's so layered. To write down the different, the different things that occurred so that you can separate the two, right? And that's how you make it easier. Because when it's all flowing in your mind, no, you're right. You can't, what's yours, what's theirs, or whatever. But if you really set maybe once a week, 30 minutes, you guys have full lives, to say, you know what, this is just about me, right? It has nothing to do with the love of my family or my child. This is just about me processing what happened on my own time, right? 30 minutes, I just really want to talk about or write about, what the doctors didn't do right, or what I wish would have occurred, or what was, really something I could have done or couldn't have done, and how I felt, right? And just giving space to it is a really good place to start separating the story, right? And that's not for you to share with anyone else, okay? This is really just for you. You don't really even have to keep it, quite frankly. You can burn it when you're done and throw it away. But it really is about just setting aside time to process it so it just doesn't come up, when it's triggering and then you don't know what to do with it. And a lot of times what happens, especially if, you have a healthy child or you have a second child, we tend to say, but I'm happy. I have my family now. It's been 3 months ago. It's been 6 months ago. It's been 2 years ago. I shouldn't be bothered anymore. And that's problematic, right? It's never going to go anywhere unless you set the time aside to do it, because one really has nothing to do with the other. What do you guys think? Janae?
I agree with that.
Amisa?
Yeah, I think it's definitely doable. It does sometimes feel like 30 minutes is a lot, but it's really not in the grand scheme of things. So,
well, I say 30 minutes, right? Trust me, I usually say 2 hours, and my patients are like, "You're crazy," right? But I say that because you don't know until you start writing how much comes out, right? So you think it's a lot of time. But guess what? Even if you do it in 15, that's fine. You don't have to force yourself to utilize the entire time, but at least you have an end time. You have an exit. You can say, this is my scheduled time for this uninterrupted. Whether I utilize all of it or not is fine, but I promise you, you will. It just feels like this is accomplished. I'm not dismissing it. I value what happened. I value my feelings and my process, and I'm going to give space to it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's so important because we're talking about, the systems not valuing us and undermining us and minimizing our experience, but we can't do that to ourselves, right? We shouldn't be doing that to each other. So many times, I'm sure, Amisa, you share, and people are like, but your baby's healthy and you're fine. And they try to minimize it as a way of helping you feel better. Or they may say, Janae, well, you have a healthy son now, and so we have to reject that from others, but also we have to honor ourselves by saying what happened to me really hurt me. And I need to honor myself by taking the 15 minutes a week to process it, to write about it, to share it, to do something. Because if not, we're just perpetuating the thing that's been put upon us.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I know for a lot of people too, they're like, well, I don't want to keep saying the same things. People don't understand. And just for clarity, when people usually say, well, you know, your baby's healthy, it's because they can't hold the space. People deflect. It's really about them. It's not about you. Okay. They can't hold the space. They don't know what to do and how to comfort or what to say. So it's easier for them to then say, but you should be fine. So I think once you're clear about that, it's easier to handle too. That really has nothing to do with whether or not you should be feeling differently. That has more to do with the person and how they're able to hold space for you or not. Right.
Yeah, this has been so powerful, so important. I want to kind of open up the conversation a little bit because we have a few folks who would like to join and share their experiences. And I'm sure Janae and Amisa holding space for them would be incredibly powerful and supportive. At first, I want to invite into this conversation Mystique Hargrove. Mystique is she's known as the Black Birth Healer on Instagram, but she is a radical newborn care, postpartum, and lactation specialist. Her pronouns are she, they, and she is the CEO and creator and owner of the Black Birth Healer. And she really does a lot of serving our communities through healing, using Caribbean healing practices, herbs, empowerment, and radical love, which is more of that is needed. More, please. If we can have more radical love, that would be awesome. So I want to first invite Mystique into our conversation and say hello.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining. And then I know we have Sherelle, who's backstage, who wanted to join us to share a story. And while we're getting Sherelle up, Mystique, I just wanted to welcome you and see if you had any thoughts for Janae and Amisa after hearing their stories.
Yes. So first of all, I would like to uplift and amplify, and this is where the radical love comes from, your story, your experience, but yourself as a whole. Your experience and you bravely sharing, publicly, what you went through, and still going through, still processing that, it's powerful. Especially, in our community, a lot of us, people of color, Black community, Black and brown, we hold it in. We've been taught to just hold it in, deal with it, and keep it moving, sweep it under the rug. You don't have time for weak moments as a Black parent or a Black and brown parent or mama. And it's like a critical time to flip that. I always say I flip tables. It's time to expose and say we need to create more spaces of healing to openly and be unapologetically raw, having those moments of saying that my experience, me sharing it, me going through it, going through therapy and taking the steps in my healing, it's validated and it should be validated. So you guys are amazing. I always give props when props are due, because when it comes to this healing, therapists like us, healers like us, it's not on us. It's not all about us. It's about y'all. With y'all, it's healing. So, every step you take, you definitely value yourself. We don't do that enough with ourselves as parents, as women, as bodies, Black bodies especially. We don't do that enough. We don't value ourselves. We don't take the time to say, I am honoring myself today, period, point blank. So I hold space for you. If you feel the need that you can't hold the space for yourself, know that virtually I'm holding that space for you. So most definitely your stories are definitely needed to be shared more, because the more folks hear this, the more folks relate and connect. I've seen comments saying, oh my goodness, I experienced a similar experience, similar situation. And that's also where the healing begins, not only individually, but as a community as well.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited that you're joining us. We have a few questions from the audience that we're going to take. We also have Sherelle who wants to join us. I want to take this time to make a really important announcement while Sherelle is getting ready to join us here in the stream. You know, we have for a long time as Black women been the backbone of the OBGYN field. They literally built the field using our bodies for experimentation. And it is time that we get what we are due. Right. And we have to repair and heal. And one of the things that I learned is that while we were here focusing on joy for the Birthright podcast, we can't have joy and healing without restoration and reconciliation. So I am so excited to announce the new Restoration, the Healing Black Birth Fund, which will be a national fundraising campaign where you can donate. And we are going to be pairing mental health professionals of color, such as Mystique, such as Nika, with Black birthing people who have experienced trauma. This is an important initiative that we must begin to restore Black women who are walking around with trauma. And I often say, we are not going to be able to prevent all of the harm. Not yet. Not yet. But we can help people heal. So you'll see right now some of the therapists who are part of the inaugural session, including Nika, of the Fund to Heal Black Birth. I'm looking forward to telling you more about that fund. But let's begin to restore what has been taken from Black women and birthing people. Let's remember that we deserve reparations for the ways that Black women's bodies have been used by this field. And we invite people into an opportunity to support other Black women and birthing people to receive professional therapy to heal Black birth trauma. So I'll be talking more about this in the days and weeks ahead. You can donate right now at birthrightpodcast.com. We'll be sharing graphics for you to spread the word. But it's time to heal and repair the Black birthing space and the people who have been in it. And I'm excited that we are a part of that. So get ready to learn more about the Fund to Heal Black Birth, which will directly pay therapists for their work to Black birthing people. Right now, I want to bring in Sherelle to begin to hear her story and to share with us, and also for us to, and I'll be taking questions. Hi, Sherelle. Thank you so much for joining. You got to unmute. It's I'm going to get the T-shirt. I'm going to get the T-shirt.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for this platform. I'm just in awe of just the support, the love that's coming through from everyone part of it. Yeah, so thank you.
I appreciate you joining. Did you have an experience that you wanted to share?
Yes. So my experience was similar to Amisa, where I went in. So I have a 2-year-old, and then I just gave birth to a son 3 months ago. And I realized that I'm still trying to figure out my emotions. A lot of things trigger me that I didn't realize. So with my more recent birth, I was planning to go in for a VBAC because with my daughter, I had a C-section. I labored at home. It was a really quick labor, maybe like 3 hours. And then by the time I got to the hospital, like I knew that the baby was coming. But when my husband and I got to the hospital, we waited at the counter probably 30 minutes, which seems like a long time when you're in labor. And it's like there was no sort of, what's the right word? Like, I can't think of the right word, but they pretty much were not in a hurry to help.
There was no urgency.
Urgency, thank you, yes. And so it wasn't until my husband, told them what's up. And so they got me in a room, they checked me, and I was 9 centimeters. And when they looked at the baby, he was laying sideways. So they were like, we need to get this baby out now, rush me to the operating room. And similar to Amisa, when they took him out, he actually wasn't breathing. So they helped him to breathe within like a minute or two. I heard him cry, and I expected to have that moment of laying my eyes on him, which I did not get that. And so in the moment, I was just thinking, it's okay. I'll be able to see him later. No big deal. So when they got me back to my room, I woke up and I was ready to go see him because he had to be in the NICU. He had jaundice and a lot of other things. And they said, oh, well, we need to do your COVID testing. And so I did that swab. The results came back and I had COVID. So I was shocked by that because I'm pretty careful. But anyhow, they said that I am not able to go and see my baby because he's in the NICU. And then at the same time, he had to be moved out of the NICU with the other babies into his own separate room because of me having COVID and potentially him being exposed to it. And so I was questioning the doctors, the nurses, like, if he's in his own room, how come I can't go to see him? And they just would not allow it. And so for the first 3 days, I did not get to see him, like literally like see him at all. And so that really, broke me. And then I also was planning to breastfeed. And there was even the lactation consultants that came into the room. They were like, well, you just need to rest and don't worry about breastfeeding or expressing milk right now because you don't have the baby with you anyways. But there was one nurse, and I'm thankful for her because she really stepped in and she would help me to hand express milk and make sure it was delivered to him. And that gave me a little bit of hope. There was a NICU nurse or doctor who was in charge, and she would call us every now and then to give us updates and say, well, the milk that you expressed is not enough and we need to give him formula. Is it okay? And so my husband and I, we decided, well, hey, how much does he need? Maybe I can get some more. And she just would not give us time to do it. When she would say a number, I would, do my best to get to that amount. And then she would come back with, oh, well, we need this amount now. And it's like, there was no consistency. And I really felt like she was not on our side. So I just ended up saying yes to the formula, and then I still expressed milk, and I said, well, give him the express milk and then the formula after if you need to supplement. So she agreed to that. It was the day that the baby, my son, was able to come into our room. So about 3 days later. And one nurse, she was like laughing and joking with another nurse. It was like a shift change. And she happened to mention about, oh, this is the one who has the milk that's in the fridge. And I was like, oh, I have milk in the fridge. And she said, yeah, there's like a lot of milk in there. And so come to find out the NICU nurse who was in charge, I guess at that hospital, they're in charge for like 2 or 3 days in a row. She was not giving my son the express milk. So I was very hurt about that. Yeah. And so there was a lot of other things, but I don't want to take up too much of the time. I think those were the main two that really stick. And you talked about the going back for the follow-up appointment. Well, I guess due to COVID, my follow-up appointment was over a video call, which ended up just being a phone call because of the video quality. And it lasted all of like maybe 5 minutes if I'm being generous. And I thought that was very strange. And so anyways, I thought that was strange, and he didn't want to take the time to look at my incision. He just went based off of what I was telling him. I didn't really get the opportunity to voice my concerns. But then after the fact, I talked with someone, the lady who I had as my doula, but because everything went so fast, I didn't end up using her for birth. And she shared with me that I should let them know of the things that I felt were wrong. And so anyways, I'm in the process of doing that now. I'm with Kaiser. So the process is very drawn out. And so I don't know.
Thank you so much for sharing, Sherelle. As you know, I hope my breastfeeding people out there are as riled up as I am about your experience. So much negative and lies about Black women not wanting to breastfeed, but no truth telling about the ways we aren't even supported when we want to. This, perfect time to remind everybody Black Breastfeeding Week is coming August 25th to 31st. I'm so sorry that your infant feeding choices were not respected. But this is unfortunately what we hear all the time, whether it's in birth, whether it's in breastfeeding. What we want for our children is often overridden, undermined, and ignored for reasons I can't explain except for racism. I hope that you will share your experience in the Earth app. So I know while you're working on these other mechanisms, but your review can be so helpful to your community. They need to know, and it could be helpful to others who are looking at that. And we're trying to create accountability for these people, including those nurses, the lactation consultants. There's a particular section for them. So consider that. But I'm really grateful that you joined the live stream. I want to give Neka and Mystique a moment to give you some feedback on your experience.
Well, I just want to say thank you first, but quickly, I know you started off saying that you still have some feelings about it and some triggers. And I'm thinking you said 2 months ago, right? Yeah, 3 months ago. So you should, right? It was just 3 months ago, right? So I just want to be clear about 3 months is not a long time at all. So you should be feeling the way you feel, and having all the triggers and things like that. It's interesting that someone would do a follow-up on the phone. I think that's extremely problematic. They don't know. There's just so many things wrong with that. I don't even know what to say. But thirdly, what I thought about as you were speaking and hearing about the lactation, I initially just felt anger. And I wanted to say, I didn't hear anyone talk about that. And that's the thing. I think that's kind of the undertone. We talk a lot about the shame and the grief, and I don't think we put enough voice to the rage, right? I mean, there's some anger, I would assume, that is there that needs to kind of be processed. But I just really want to say you are exactly the way you should be. Do not rush. You're not late. You should be fine. But 3 months ago, it's not a long time ago. That to me, 3 months ago is yesterday. Okay. And so I'm happy that you're advocating for yourself and that you're going to put into some place some, at least hopefully there could be some people taking responsibility. But for right now, I would recommend the same thing, doing some writing. But like I said, more importantly, I don't want you to feel like because you started off saying, I still feel triggered, as if you shouldn't feel triggered. Okay. And so I really wanted to highlight, you should absolutely still feel triggered.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I did have experienced some trauma with my daughter, because things happened as well. Like I got some random shot in my shoulder that nobody could tell me what that was while they were stitching me up. So, I mean, just a lot of weird stuff. And so I don't know. It's still new to me talking about it and hearing other stories, because I can't remember who talked about it, but I do have a lot of friends who are not Black, and I'm a part of a mom's group, and I'm probably one of 3 Black women out of like 50 to 75 women total. And it's like when I talk with them, they don't share that same experience, or they, like someone said, they're shocked. So that kind of made me feel like something was wrong with me and maybe something I could have done differently. So it's good to hear that it's okay to take that time to process things and to do my work in healing.
I want to say thank you for sharing your story, but from the bottom of my entire spirit and heart, like, I feel so much deep. I'm so sorry that you had to experience that, because you should have not experienced that at all. And the inner birth worker in me, because I'm also a birth worker, I deal with, I call it black lactation. I'm a black lactation professional. I felt the rage for you, because that was uncalled for. But I will say, out of all the mess, out of all the shambles that you had experienced, you are taking those shambles, those pieces, you putting yourself together, you're doing the steps. Like, I am truly, I don't even know you, just met you. And I'm truly proud of, like, you taking that initiative to say, I felt this, you took the time to process, and maybe you didn't, but you took that initiative to say, I did not like the way I was treated. And you're taking that step, and you expressing that, and gives other folks empowerment to say, I'm looking at the comments like, hey, I experienced that as well. And now they know they can take those steps too. So you're presenting that, you're modeling the next step. So when you went through what you went through and what you're going through at the moment during that time, like, oof, like, I want to flip a table for you, like, because that was uncalled for. And when you said you felt, because that happens with Black bodies, especially, I'll say Black bodies period, but bodies of color, but Black bodies especially, they, their non-Black counterparts will say, I didn't experience that. And I heard you say, it's something wrong with me, and they didn't get. I'm telling you now, there's nothing wrong with you. You did nothing wrong. And it was them, the guilt. And that's a process through your healing. You will get to the place of handing over your guilt, and taking it away from you and putting it on them, removing it from yourself. And then the more healing can begin. So you shouldn't, nothing is wrong with you. You shouldn't have experienced that. And I will say that I'm amplifying it, uplifting you, taking the next steps of continuing to advocate your experience and advocating what you're going through, because that will be the next brick, the next step to, I'll call it checking, collecting, correcting everybody who was involved in your experience. So, but we all hold space for you, with love, support, as a community, as a village, and just making sure that you continue to take the time also to say, I need a moment for myself, because these next steps can be hard, because it's re-traumatizing yourself to write down every single time and whose name and what. I always say, give yourself grace. Give yourself grace during this period. Like she stated, don't rush it. Take your time, because it's still new.
Yeah, I mean, we've all had work probations that lasted more than 90 days. So, it's a very short period of time. And I want to honor that for you, Sherelle. I also want to hold space for anger. It's a complicated emotion for Black women, because we're often afraid to be angry, because we know that our anger could cause a retaliation, right? Like we aren't allowed, and we're afraid of stepping into that angry Black woman trope. And so even when we have the right to be angry, we are suppressed sometimes because we're afraid to express it. That's not okay. And so I love that Nika and Mystique both are speaking to the fact that we have a right to be angry, right? And that we need to honor that. It's okay. And 98% of the time it's justified, appropriate. Thank you. And so for us to hold space for you to be mad as hell, right? Because, why didn't they give your baby your milk? I mean, just all sorts of things. So,
especially no skin to skin and
all the things. All the things. So
yes.
we have to hold space for each other, including our righteous rage, our other rage, and our anger. And so I want to just make sure that you heard that part of giving yourself grace was that we are holding space for you to be mad as hell if you need to be. And if you're not, we're doing it for you or already done. And that is allowed, that we as Black women need to be allowed to have the full range of emotions, even anger, as was mentioned, sadness, grief, all of that, because we're not machines.
Right. And just to quickly say, and that may not have happened for you, but a lot of times that I've heard for a lot of women that they haven't advocated because they didn't want to be seen as such, right?
Exactly.
And so not only is that problematic, but we have internalized that. We have internalized that anger means loss of control, which they're not one and the same. So I really just wanted to say that out loud. Just because you're angry doesn't mean that you are no longer in control, right? And so we have to remember that, because we have also been socialized to say, we don't want to be seen. I don't want anyone to label me. I don't want anyone to do this because I'm not that way, right? And it's like, well, no one is that way, right? It's an emotion. You know what I mean? And so just to recognize that we shouldn't internalize as anger being a loss of control. They're not interchangeable.
Yeah, so important. I want to honor everybody's time. First of all, I want to let everybody know that tonight at 7 p.m., Naka and Mystique will be joining me for an IG Live to further this conversation. I really want you to bring questions and to that conversation, because we're going to be talking about how we can shift the narrative in our own communities. How can we make sure that we know that our pain, our anger, all of it is not something that we should be marginalizing and normalizing, and how we can reverse that, which, is something that was done to us, but we often do to ourselves right now. And that's a bit of unlearning that we can do as a people. We want to hold space for each other. So maybe we'll get some tools on what to say when someone is sharing a story that's uncomfortable for you, but necessary for them. And to think about what we can do as a people to really start to hold space for this healing so that we can have true joy. I want to bring Amisa and Janae back out. So excited to share with you about restoration, the fun to heal Black birth. I hope you will learn more about it, and that we owe it to Black women and the Black birthing space to begin to heal the harm that was done historically, and as you know, continues to be done. I am excited that I have been able to host Birthright season 1. Many thanks to the California Healthcare Foundation for funding our first season. We are excited about the stories that we have to tell. We must reverse the doom and gloom narrative of Black maternal health. We have positive birth stories, and even if we don't, we can heal. And we need to find our way to joy, even if that is not our initial experience in our birth. But we all deserve it. And I want us to bask in it, claim it as your birthright, and let's live and move toward that. Amisa and Janae, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. Feeling lucky to be a part of this. Feeling like it's an amazing opportunity and definitely a much needed one, as we've seen from all the comments people have added. So I just want to say thank you for having me here for this, and I hope there'll be many more like this for others to be able to share their stories.
Yes, thank you. I definitely feel good and supported, and it's nice to know that other people have experiences like mine, and I'm not alone. So
you are not alone. You are not alone. And if anyone can get anything from our time today, that is the most important piece, that our stories do have power, and that when we share them, we can find healing. We don't have to hold on to shame and guilt, and that there are folks who are holding space for you and your experiences so that we know that we are not alone. I want to thank again Amisa. If you're interested in learning more about her work, she's on Instagram at YUNG_Amy G. Dollar. Okay. And if you want to get to know Janae, she's on Instagram as ZOS_mama. And we're going to be holding space for Zola. Thank you so much for joining us. If you haven't caught up on all the Birthright episodes for season 1, please come back. Check out the Birthright season 1 episodes. Go to birthrightpodcast.com. Check out the restoration episodes. If you're here on the YouTube page, please subscribe. Check out our videos. Follow the Birthright Podcast on YouTube. So much to do. Check out our Birthright Podcast merchandise, which also helps support our work. I'm so grateful to the amazing women and birthing people and folks who have showed up through this season, in this episode, and on this mission that we can reclaim our birthright one story at a time. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so grateful. I invite you to check out our season compilation. At the end of every episode, I ask a question. What is our birthright? Something that we need to state and reclaim for ourselves. And we put together some of the awesome answers, and I'm going to leave you today with one of them. Thank you for joining us.
I think the birthright is receiving double for our trouble. And that is for our trouble, our mamas and ancestors and whoever, their trouble through birth, that now we are on the cusp of receiving double for that in blessings, in children that are coming into the world, solving the problems or being creative, and people just creating things that we've been waiting for a long time. Those are the children that's coming.